Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine War Update extra video, giving you the nuggets and tidbits to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Where should we go to first? Well, let's go to an intercepted phone call. These are really valuable insights into Russian psyche, into what troops are thinking, what their families back home are thinking. Translated often by Dmitry at War Translated. This one is an intercepted call, a Russian soldier telling his wife about a failed assault operation with no support, surviving a direct missile strike, and Russian forces writing off friendly fire as casualties taken from Ukrainians. Oh, that is a very interesting nugget there. So this is the wife speaking, and I'll read this out to you because I know many of you listen to this rather than watch it. So the wife says, "They're not accusing you of anything, are they?" And he says, in fact, I'll do this in a slightly different way. He says, "What's up with me? It's our moron commanders who must be accused. Retards," he says. "They morons sent us to death." She says, "Why?" He says, "They said you will have our mortars covering you, tanks covering you, AGS. As a result, not a single round from a mortar. Vazia started sending them coordinates, and mortars said, 'We're changing our position,' and started effing moving. No tanks either. AGS said, 'I'm pulling back.' When shelling started, he dropped his AGS and ran off. So we started pulling back. We hid. I said, 'I hear a drone hovering above,' and next I hear a missile. I got up, got stunned, not understanding anything. In front of me is Misha on the ground yelling. I come up to him. He shows me his leg, and his front of his body got ripped out with the leg. Next to me is medic Nemetz. I said, 'Nemetz, bandage him.' I turn around, smoke coming. I thought it was from the missile. Then I look and see intestines. The missile went straight into Max. I come up, only his head and arm remained of him. Evacuation, as always, is 2 kilometers away from us." "So you pulled them yourself?" the wife says. "Only here at the position Koryavi. I think I'm wounded." "Me? Where?" "He. In the ass." "Me. Take off your pants." He takes off and he has a piece in his ass. Wife says, "Won't they punish those who didn't send help?" And he says, "They'll get medals for it." "For real?" she says. "You know what they do? Our sappers were clearing a road for the tank, blew up a house with a unit of 15 of our people in it. 7 dead, 8 wounded. They said as if the Ukrainians blew them up." And there you go. So a pretty graphic representation of the sort of stuff that's going on. The idea that they are totting up friendly fire statistics on the sort of being losses from Ukrainian fire, and not getting support from mortar, from tank fire, and having to go alone, and then the results of a missile attack. So that's pretty hardcore. This is another translation from More Translated. I mentioned this in my news piece this morning. More on the Mobiks from 1231 Regiment I posted about earlier, addressing the commander personally. They've been robbed of all equipment and sent to assault a height the locals were unable to take for ages. And as I said earlier, I think locals here means the kind of people who were already stationed there, Russian soldiers, several, or maybe DPR or LNR. Several battalions of Mobiks before them have already been slaughtered. So this is Russians directly speaking to their command. So they say, "Hello, we are from 1231 or 1231 Regiment from Tatarstan. We were transferred to the command of the DPR." Yes, so it's the DPR. Their slogan is, "We fight to the last soldier and they'll send new ones." Took away our vehicles and humanitarian aid. On the 5th of February, we were sent into an assault without any preparation. Each had 4 magazines. I'm not even talking about medicines. We were shot at from tanks, artillery, AGS, machine guns, but our, scare quotes, support fired 3 times 4 and said, I think 3 to 4, and said that was their limit. They couldn't do more. To the left and right were enemies with night vision. They adjusted fire at us. 2 battalions were already killed there, and there's no way of getting them out of there now. Later, we found out that the locals, they've been unable to take this position for a very long time. This is not fake. We are not in capture. We just want to tell you the information that's hidden from you. We are the 4th reinforcements who came here, and no one returned from there yet. only as 200 or 300. That's code words for killed in action or wounded in action. We saw mass graves of people no one's picking up. They've been there for half a year. Help us in our difficult situation. Hear our outcry. Our wives already appealed to the Kazan prosecution office and received an answer: DPR is not Russia. In other words, this is me speaking now. They've obviously, complained to other people back at home, and they said, well, we can't do anything because DPR is not technically Russia. Although, of course, the whole point of this is that, DPR is Russia, but the command isn't directly under the Russian command. So anyway, to continue, they say DPR is a separate thing. We can't do anything. Only send your appeal to the DPR prosecution. They said the mobilized will be holding the third line of defense, but we're sent into assaults. Locals share the secret that we are the fourth reinforcement. But where are they? Where are these guys? We haven't seen our regiment commander. We are commanded by simple locals. They're giving criminal orders. We want to be commanded by the officers who managed us in Kazan from Russia. We do not refuse to fight, but carrying out suicide orders and playing on someone else's field is impossible. Taking a height defended by mortars and tanks with only assault rifles is unreal, especially at night. There is no support. Only criminal orders for slaughter. This is absolutely fascinating. The idea that the DPR, again, who they don't think they should be commanded by, are ordering them basically into assaults as mobilized troops, just with assault rifles against tanks and mortars to take on these heights. And they're the fourth set of reinforcements, and everyone else has been slaughtered, and they've not been removed from being slaughtered, and they've laid there for half a year. I mean, all of this builds up a picture. I just want to talk to you because basically I often get sort of pushback from pro-Russians, and I don't want to, I know sometimes you say, why do you engage with these people? Actually, because they're always, I think, learning opportunities to learn on certain points, either how to present counter arguments or how to show they're wrong, and in case any of their arguments find purchase. So what we have here is a comment from a video this morning, and the response from this pro-Russian is not a response, but that's not the point. So Leah Kroll, awesome, says, thank you. Wow, 900 killed per day. That's 300,000 a year. All conscripts dead within a year. That is not sustainable for Russia for long. So this is the idea that Russia are losing an unsustainable amount of people. And then this guy says, smiley, laughing face emoji. And it's like, emojis don't make an argument, mate. That's like, grow up. But actually, the point here is quite serious, right? So this is the denial. This is the idea that the claimed figures that the Ukrainians put out are not correct. So what he's saying is, Leah, you're not correct here. Ha ha ha! You've got to be joking. 900 killed a day. That's ridiculous. I'm going to laugh at your obvious stupidity. That's what he's saying here. Now, I'm going to talk to you a really quick sidebar of philosophy here. So in philosophy, you have three different types of argument. You've got deductive argument, an inductive argument, and an abductive argument. Deductive arguments are things like all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is immortal. If you agree with the opening premises or the premises, then the conclusion follows necessarily, and you can't really argue with the conclusion. It is, you have a syllogism that's hopefully valid, and one blah 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 blah. Therefore, that okay. Fantastic. So that's a deductive argument. Inductive arguments are based on observation, and they're more probabilistic, which is, say, for example, all swans I've ever seen are white, therefore all swans are white. Or all swans I've ever seen are white, therefore the next one I see is going to be white, type thing. And in both cases, the next one you see could be black. But actually, probabilistically, you are rationally within your rights to conclude that all swans are white if you've seen like 10 million swans and they've all been white, or you're rationally justified in saying the next one I see is going to be white, even though it's not necessarily the case. In fact, we know that there are black swans. Okay, so that's an inductive argument. Abductive arguments are inferences to the best explanation. So if you have two competing hypotheses, right, what does the data better support? Okay, so the two competing hypotheses are the figures that Ukraine put out each day are correct, or vaguely correct, or in the right ballpark, or decently indicative. And the pro-Russian kind of laughy emoji position is that that's laughable, right? They're not correct. Ha ha ha! You've got to be joking. Right? And I forget whether the Ukrainians are taking as many losses or not, that that's a different conversation. Let's just talk about Russian losses. So you have these two competing hypotheses: is vaguely true, or is vaguely accurate, or it's not accurate at all. Then you get all the data. So the data is endless amounts of drone footage we are seeing of troops dying, the fields full of bodies. We are seeing in Vuhledar just in a week, literally like tens and tens and tens and tens and tens of vehicles taken down. We are seeing uh, Avdiivka footage going on. We're seeing X, Y, and Z. Right. Then it's stuff that I've shown you today. We've got an intercepted call saying that, we're getting shot ourselves, blown up by, another intercepted call saying we were massacred. That video recording of the guy saying it was brutal today, etc., etc. Then we have these Mobiks that saying with a fourth reinforcement, fourth bunch of reinforcements, and everyone else has already died. Criminal, we're given criminal orders to go to our slaughter, and it's not like this is a one-off. These are popping up all the time. So the question is, which hypothesis does all of this evidence or all of this data better support? Does this support the claim that the Russians aren't losing many troops and that the Ukrainian figures are vastly overstated? Or does this better support the claim that the Ukrainian figures are somewhat correct, vaguely accurate, or indeed very accurate? And again, all that video footage all the stuff I do show you, which is the tip of the iceberg, right? So there's an awful lot of stuff I don't show you. Again, not bothered about all the stuff about the Ukrainians dying. That's a different argument. So it could be that Ukrainians are losing the same amount or more, right? That's irrelevant to this point. This point is, as Leah says, absolutely spot on here. Wow, 900 killed a day. So that's a shed load a year. So the question is, are they losing that many a year? So another data point to add to this. So inference to the best explanation. What best explains the undeniable fact that all Russians have to agree with, that the Russian government has done partial to mass mobilization? That they've already done a mass mobilization of at least 300,000 troops. They've been at war for a year now. They've sent at the time initially 250,000 troops. Why would they need to mobilize another 300,000 plus troops? And indeed, the claims are that that's been continuing. There might be up to 500,000 troops. Then the idea that they are going to do another round of mobilization, inference to the best explanation. What hypothesis does that better support? Does the fact that they're going to do, or the claim that they're going to do a second mobilization, but indeed the mobilization they've already have, better support the idea that those figures are vastly overstated? Or does it better support the hypothesis that those figures are indeed somewhat correct and accurate? So you can do laughy emojis all you like, but that doesn't make an argument. In fact, it's pathetic. And let's look at the evidence. Are you suggesting that all of that evidence that can be compiled, right, where you've got the material lost over the last week, is indeed an accurate representation, although figures that are released every day is an accurate representation of the material loss, because we've got video evidence of that? Like, what are you saying? Are you saying that that's wrong, that you can't use your eyes, that it's all CGI? I mean, I don't get it. Are you saying that mobilization better supports the idea that Russia haven't lost many troops? I don't get it. So this pro-Russian commentator here loses the argument. Like, you've got to bring the receipts, right? And obviously an emoji, that's not an argument, but you get the point. Like, if people are denying these figures, right? Okay, you're denying these figures, brilliant, fine. Let's do this, right? What's the evidence you have that these figures are wrong? And how do these figures best explain the data that we do have? How do these figures better explain, if these figures are totally wrong, how does that hypothesis best explain the fact that the Russians have mobilized 300,000 to 500,000 people and have upped the conscription rates, etc., etc., and have got Wagner? So another data point: Wagner PMC going to prisons to recruit soldiers. What hypothesis does that better support. Anyway, though I am beginning to think really that those Ukrainian figures released every day really are fairly accurate, even in the number of troops lost. Like, even if they're 20% off, even if they're 40% off, those are terrible figures. So, okay, it's not 1,000 each day for the last sort of 4 days, give or take. 600, okay, 600 a day times 365. That's a bad position to be in, right? So yeah, I think it's really important to say that. And you might think, don't give these guys the oxygen of speaking to them. Like, emoji means nothing. No, but actually, this allows me to explain a really important point, because I'm talking about those figures every single day. Right. So next on the list of things to talk about is this. I'm not really going to play you any of this. I'm going to signpost this to you. It's well worth watching. Someone put it on one of the threads saying you should check this out, and actually it is really good. Professional military dubbed interview with a Russian soldier in Ukrainian captivity. This guy was captured on September the 9th. He's spent a long time in captivity, but he's still full of Russian propaganda. He gets to listen to the radio, but he interprets what he hears of Ukrainian radio. He interprets that through a Russian lens. This discussion is fascinating. This guy does a really good job of. I mean, actually, he's quite philosophical here. He has what's called a Socratic dialectic method. He basically gets this guy to tie himself in knots by using just questioning. Say, do you think this? Do you think this? Well, then you've just said that over there. Where do you think that? How does this and that like match up? Because you said that over there and that doesn't work with this, but you've just said this over here, and stuff like that. So, and it's really interesting, and it's a great insight into how our minds will warp reality to fit to our own narrative, and actually the very difficult job that there will be to convince people with evidence. So I've just been talking about inference of best explanation, how we deal with evidence, but actually there's still a long way for convincing someone. So you can present someone with a whole bunch of evidence, and their brains will be able to, with their sort of biases and heuristics, their mental methods, they'll be able to warp that to fit their own agenda. It's called cognitive dissonance reduction. But yeah, fascinating interview. So go and check that out. It's the channel on YouTube is Rick the Ukrainian, and that is a fascinating dubbed interview, and it's really nice that it's dubbed because I watched that on 1.75 times speed. So it's an hour and 3 minutes, and you can watch it at almost half that time. So I'd advise doing that a lot with stuff that you watch, including with me, because then you miss out all the ums and ers and me getting my words in a mess, because it just goes like that. 1.75. Listen to me on that. I'm really good. Or something. Right, I'm going to refer you back to the second part. I'm going to go through just a little other section on this amazingly good foreign affairs article by Dara Masakot saying what Russia got wrong. And I took you through this yesterday. Go and check out yesterday's extra, or the first one from yesterday, where I go through this article and pick out the salient points about what Russia did wrong in the war so far, what they've done wrong in the war so far, from a kind of strategic operational point of view. And this is the second part, or my second part. This is kind of like the middle third of the article, how Russia played itself. Talks about OPSEC and the fact that no one other than the higher echelons of military and political command knew about this attack. Right? Putin and a few others around him knew about it, and then they delivered it. They accumulated all these troops under the auspices of training in sort of Belarus and southern Russia, or in the oblasts just north of the Ukrainian border, and but no one really knew. The commanders didn't know. The soldiers didn't know what they're doing. In fact, the invasion started, and you had POWs who caught that still thought they were kind of doing training, or weren't really aware of being sent to a war. So this says the Kremlin's war plans, of course, were made public months before the war. Oh, how does that fit with this operational security? As a number of news outlets have reported, including the New York Times and the Washington Post, US intelligence agencies uncovered detailed and accurate outlines of Russia's plans and then shared them with the media, as well as with allies and partners. Rather than abort the invasion, the Kremlin insisted to journalists and diplomats that the large contingents of troops massed on Ukraine's borders were there for training and that it had no intention of attacking its neighbour. These claims did not fool the West, but they did fool most Russians, including those in the armed forces. The Kremlin withheld its war plans from the military stakeholders at many levels, from individual soldiers and pilots to general officers, and many troops and officials were surprised when they received orders to invade. A recent report by the Rossi Royal United Services Institute, a British defence and security think tank, which was based on extensive fieldwork and interviews with the Ukrainian officials, found that even senior members of the Russian general staff were kept in the dark about the invasion plans until shortly before it started. Because most military leaders were not brought into the planning effort until the last minute, they could not correct major mistakes. So, right up and down the armed services, you had people that weren't aware of what they were going to do. So they couldn't say, what are you doing that for? We don't have the right amount of tanks, or we don't have the right amount of rationing, or we don't have this, and we don't have that. There wasn't this kind of communication going on because it was kept in this information was kept in the top echelons of that command structure. And therefore, you couldn't correct a bad course. The government did not appear to undergo what is referred to in Russian strategy as a special period, a time of categorizing, stockpiling, and organizing resources for a major war, because its planners did not know they needed to get ready for one. I talked about this yesterday. They weren't actually planning for a war because they didn't think they'd be in a war, because they had false information, so that they ended up actually thinking it was going to be a special military operation. And then being in Ukraine thinking it was going to be a deposing of the government over a 2 to 15-day period, and that didn't happen. The Ukrainians put up resistance and it turned into a war, which meant they hadn't stockpiled the necessary stuff for a war. And plus, the people who were doing the actual invading, the troops and the commanders at the lower levels, hadn't kind of got all the necessary stuff in place because they didn't know what was going on and they were only told last minute. So the excessive secrecy also meant that Moscow missed several key opportunities to prepare the defense industry to produce and store essential ammunition. Even after they were stationed near Ukraine, Russian units were not staffed or supplied at appropriate levels, likely because planners believed the troops were conducting training exercises and because the military did not have time to coordinate its electronic warfare systems. When Russian forces attempted to jam Ukraine's communications, they also jammed their own. And this is something we've heard on Intercepts, like the sort of ones I've played already, that their own jamming equipment has ended up jamming their own equipment. Okay, it goes on. The pilots had virtually no experience fighting over a larger forested country, let alone against an adversary capable of hitting their jets with layers of air defences. They were given little to no training in such tactics before the invasion, and that inexperience is partly why, despite sometimes flying hundreds of missions per day, Russia has been unable to dismantle Ukraine's air force or air defences. Another factor was how Russia decided to employ its forces, because Russia's ground troops were in grave danger within days. The VKS, the Russian Air Force, was quickly reassigned from suppressing the Ukrainian air defences to providing close air support, according to Russian analysis. This adjustment helped prevent Russia from establishing air supremacy, and it forced the Russians to fly at low altitudes within reach of Ukraine's Stinger missiles. As a result, they lost many helicopters and fighter jets. So, absolutely crucial point of the war. In the article talked yesterday, and I talked to you about how they were unable to do. They didn't do these seed suppression of enemy air defense operations for 4 to 6 weeks before the war started, which is what you want to do before any big war that you're planning, which you want to soften that place. You want to take out the air defenses by doing that for 4 to 6 weeks, because this was so secret and they weren't planning on doing a war. It really was a special military operation. They didn't do those seed operations. So then when they started, and within a couple of days realized, oh my goodness, we are actually in a war, they then had to scrabble around to do these seed operations, and they could only manage like 5 days of them. And they were making some progress, but they didn't really follow it right through, which allowed the Ukrainian Air Force to remain largely intact. And then the Air Force were called to support the troops who were getting into trouble because they were poorly planned and logistically supported to doing a job that no one had envisaged them doing, which is being in a war. So then the Air Force didn't get the air supremacy that they need to conduct a war, and were flying these low, close support operations or sorties, and they were getting taken out with stingers and whatnot. The other problem being that they didn't have the right ammunition. So I think the stats are something like the US has 10% dumb munitions and 90% guided, which is when a plane fires off its stuff, 90% of the stockpiles they have are guided munitions, guided ordnance. So you can fire and forget or whatever. You fire it off, it goes to the target, it's guided, and it goes there, bang, blows up. Russians got a load of ammunition, but 90% of it is dumb munition and 10% is guided. So they used up their guided munitions fairly quickly. And then they were having to do, dumb munition sorties. And to do that, you have to fly low and fly over your target to drop the dumb munition because it's not guided. You literally have to drop it on the target or get enough speed up for it to go a little further with the help of physics. But the idea is that these guys were flying low sorties, and that aided the Ukrainians in taking down their jets. And you saw loads of this. There's lots of footage of Stingers taking out Russian jets for these reasons. And just the last bit that I'm going to talk about today from this article is this decision made either to mollify the Russian population or because of Kremlin. So what is this decision? The idea to keep it secret and then to call it a special military operation. And after it became a war, because I think it really was a special military operation to begin with, but then it quickly became a war. But the Russians refused. In fact, you're still not allowed to technically call it a war. So that's a year later, right? This decision not to call it a war made either to mollify the Russian population or because the Kremlin assumed the conflict would end quickly, prevented the country from implementing administrative rules that would have allowed it to gain quick access to the legal, economic, and material resources it needed to support the invasion. For at least the first 6 months, the false classification also made it easy for soldiers to resign or refuse to fight without facing desertion charges. That's a fascinating little nugget there. So they until they sort of change the rules and whatnot, because it's only a special military operation, you could say, right, I'm not going to fight, or I don't want to do this, or I can and desert, and you wouldn't be it wouldn't be so problematic as it normally would. Anyway, that's the next part of that article. I think we probably got about halfway through now. It's such a good article. What Russia got wrong in foreign affairs. Go and check it out. I think you get your first article free in foreign affairs, so you should be able to read that. Okay, another fascinating little nugget here is that without much noise, Pakistan has become the ammunition suppliers of Ukraine, especially for artillery ammunition. Now, we already know Bulgaria is the unsung hero of the war for supplying, I think, at one stage, a third of Ukraine's entire ammunition, like towards the beginning of the war. Provided an awful lot of stuff. I think they provided a lot of fuel as well, if I remember correctly. But now Pakistan is being sort of appealed to well, I don't know whether they're doing it freely, whether there's pressure for them to do it, whether they get a sweetener for doing it, whatever. They are providing ammunition, and that's probably, I would need to look into this, but probably because they have large stockpiles of Soviet era ammunition. So you'll find that a lot of people, well, the British have been quite good at this, which is we don't have stockpiles of pretty much anything. What we've got is money. So we go around the world saying, right, we say to Ukraine, we're going to give you X, Y, and Z, but actually we don't really have X, Y, and Z. So we're going to go around the world and buy X, Y, and Z, and then you can have it, and we'll give it to you. It's coming from us, sort of, as in we're facilitating it and we're buying it, but actually it's coming from Pakistan, from here, there, and everywhere. So I don't know how much of this is Pakistan giving it or whether it's other people buying it off Pakistan. I think probably the latter. As someone said here, Pakistan is on the brink of economic collapse. They desperately need foreign currency. Don't think they support Ukraine for humanitarian reasons. They need and get hold card US dollars in exchange. So yeah, this could be a case of like it's not a case of heralding this as Pakistan's wonderful alliance with Ukraine and then taking a moral and political stance. This is more like, yeah, actually, you can buy that off us because we need the money. Okay, another video. I showed you North Korean soldiers being very macho yesterday and saying this would never happen in Britain. Here's another thing that would never happen in Britain. That's not to say that it's necessarily bad because it wouldn't. But I think stuff like this is fascinating. People, right? I think there must be a rule of soldiers who walk with, and these aren't soldiers, these are kids, and this is what's particularly disturbing. But the more ridiculous your parade uniform is, and the more ridiculous your parade and style of marching is, the less respect I have for your armed services, I think. If you just march normally and do normal stuff, then jobs are good and brilliant. But if it involves lots of crazy marching on the stops on the spot and wearing silly uniforms, then I don't know. I tend to be rather cynical. This Noel report says that whole country is sick, not just Putin. Here's another perfect example of how indoctrination has been passed down from generation to generation for years. Hitler Youth 2.0. And actually, there is something about this that is very Hitler Youth-ish. And I hate childhood indoctrination. As a philosopher of religion, that really gets my goat. I think people should be able to be free thinkers, and you should allow children. You should teach children the tools to come up to reach their own conclusions, but don't expect them to reach those conclusions in their childhood. I mean, they might do, but don't take that seriously because they're not old enough. Like I would never call a child a religious child, right? I would never say that's a Christian child, that's a Muslim child, because I would never say that's a Labour child or a Conservative child. They don't understand Labour politics. They don't understand like Conservative politics. That's a Democrat child or that's a Republican child. You wouldn't say that. So why would you say that with theology, which is even more confusing and often actually makes very little sense at all? So you give them the tools. Here's the world. Here are the tools to think properly. And then when you're old enough and you've heard enough stuff, you have the tools to navigate through all that data. You can come to your own conclusions. This is just full on indoctrination, and it's terribly sad. Yeah, that's enough of that. It just kind of depresses me. Yeah. This is some footage of a dugout, a Ukrainian dugout that is better than some of the places I've lived in my life. I think about backpacking around the world a couple of times and my student digs and whatnot. I mean, this is amazing. Now, I'm not sure that this is representative of all dugouts, I might hasten to add. But just good old ACDC again. It's just well worth having a little gander. Got a bit of insulation there. Good use of chipboard and wood, and look at that. It's got some supplies again. Heated insulation. You got some kind of wood burner there, and then lighting, bunk beds, nice and comfortable. Yeah, good stuff. This is an electricity. And one would assume internet connectivity. I mean, pretty amazing stuff, really. Goodness me, he's got TV in there. Wowzers. Anyway, I just thought that was fascinating. Now, I don't think that's necessarily representative, but then I have seen a couple that have been impressive in my reporting on this. Okay, this is Dmitry War Translated again, where he's translated and summarized Arestovych, the former spokesperson for the Ukrainian government, really, that still gives daily synopses of what's going on, rather than talk about his entire stream here. Just a few points about HIMARS. So the pace of the Russian offensive will be hindered by logistics stockpiles being 90 kilometers behind the front to avoid HIMARS. New 160-kilometer missiles will wreak havoc on the Russian rear areas. Arestovych recalls when during the summer the Russians took Popasna and Sierodonetsk, but with the arrival of just a few HIMARS, the Russian offensive was swiftly halted. This Russian offensive will go contrary to Russian plans and expectations. A lot of surprises await the Russians. Supporters of Ukraine will be pleasantly surprised. Judging by Vuhledar, the Russians are already experiencing massive problems with their offensive capabilities. Couple of points to make here. That one, absolutely don't forget that HIMARS are still operational, and that will affect the logistics that are supplying these offensives. That will cause some real headaches for the Russians. Then we've got the mines that I've talked about over the last 2 or 3 days that are absolutely hammering the material in Vuhledar, in Avdiivka, Kamyanka by Avdiivka, the south of Avdiivka also. And one assumes in this Svatova Kremna front line, I know Bilorivka might have had some issues, the Russians around there. Uh, this is like massively impinging mines the Russians' ability to go forward quickly. And I think I think that might be what Arestovych is sort of talking to here, which is there are a lot of surprises await the Russians. I think mines will be a large part of that, but then the HIMARS continuing to work. It'd be interesting to see whether HIMARS will ever take out, will ever be used on, you know, things other than static targets way behind the lines. Whether they'll ever be used on, force concentrations at the front lines, I don't know. But yeah, and if they can get longer ranged munitions, then of course that changes again. That will be another game changer, as we hope with the GL-SDB, the ground launch small diameter bombs, which are these dumb munitions that are given a guided capacity, or sorry, guided capability in order to hit things from a longer range. They are fired from HIMARS, and I believe they're working on the system, or so HIMARS at the moment can't fire GLSDBs, but they are working, as I say, on the rocket that can take these and fire them. It's going to be a game changer, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, there you go. Thank you so much. Please like, subscribe, and share. All the ways you can help the channel are in the description below. Really appreciate that. Thanks so much for the recent thanks that have been put on a couple of my threads, and the buy me a coffee. Hugely appreciated. It allows me to continue to do what I do. Without that, I just wouldn't be able to justify doing this. So thank you. And thanks to all my members as well. Hopefully get out some content for members only soon. I've done one. I'll do another shortly, but really appreciate them obviously as well. Thank you. I'll speak to you tomorrow.